In 1911, while much of the food industry hid behind closed doors, Henry John Heinz threw his open. He walked the spotless floors of his own factory, where workers in white uniforms.
Pittsburgh, 1844. In the shadow of brick factories belching black smoke over the Allegheny River, in a modest house where German immigrants struggled to carve out their piece of the American dream, a boy was born who would transform the way a nation ate. Henry John Heinz arrived into a world of dirt, disease, and industrial chaos, a world that didn't yet know it was waiting for him. His father, John Henry Heinz, was a brickmaker, a practical man, a man of clay and fire and honest sweat. He expected his son to follow the same path, to learn the trade, to build a life one brick at a time. But young Henry had other ideas simmering beneath his quiet, methodical exterior. Even at 8 years old, Henry displayed an entrepreneurial instinct that baffled and impressed his parents in equal measure. While other children played stickball in the muddy streets or chased hoops with sticks, Henry was in his mother's garden, carefully picking vegetables. But he wasn't just picking them, he was washing them, sorting them by size, arranging them in neat baskets lined with clean cloth, loading them onto a wooden wheelbarrow, and selling them door to door to neighbors. His mother, Anna Margaretha, was the architect of his character. A devout woman who believed cleanliness was not merely next to godliness but was godliness itself. She taught Henry that presentation mattered as much as product. Every cabbage had to be spotless. Every carrot scrubbed. Every transaction conducted with a smile and a promise. People buy with their eyes before they buy with their mouths, she told him, her thick German accent flavoring the English words. It was a lesson Henry would never forget. It would become the cornerstone of an empire, the education of a visionary. By the time Henry turned 16, his father pulled him from school and put him to work in the family brick factory. The decision was practical. The family needed money, and Henry was old enough to contribute. But for young Henry, it was a crucible that would forge his future in unexpected ways. The work was brutal. The kilns roared with heat that could blister skin. The air was thick with dust that choked lungs. Workers toiled 12-hour days, 6 days a week, their hands cracked and bleeding from handling rough clay and fired brick. There was no romance in it, no glory, only survival. But Henry's mind was always working, always observing. He watched how raw materials, clay, water, sand, were transformed through process and fire into products. He studied how those products were distributed, sold, and marketed. He saw what happened when quality slipped, when a batch of bricks came out weak or uneven. Customers complained, refused to pay, took their business elsewhere. Quality, he realized, wasn't just about pride. It was about survival. But Henry's heart wasn't in bricks. It was in food. The nightmare of American food. To understand Henry Heinz's revolution, you have to understand the horror show that was American food production in the mid-1800s. Imagine walking into a butcher shop in 1860. The floor is slick with blood and offal. Flies swarm over meat hanging in the open air, meat that's been sitting there for days, maybe weeks. The butcher wipes his knife on his pants, the same pants he's been wearing for a month without washing, and carves off a piece for you. You take it home, cook it, and hope you don't get sick. Now imagine the bakery. Flour is mixed with chalk and plaster to make it stretch further. Bread is filled with alum to make it whiter, more appealing. Sometimes sawdust is mixed in. No one tells you this. No one has to. There are no labels, no regulations, no oversight. Milk. Routinely diluted with water. Sometimes that water came from contaminated wells. Sometimes it was mixed with chalk or plaster to restore the white color. Formaldehyde was added to keep it from spoiling. Children died from drinking it, but milk sellers faced no consequences. Candy was colored with lead chromate and arsenic compounds. Pickles were brightened with copper sulfate. Coffee was bulked up with roasted peas, beans, or acorns. Tea leaves were recycled, dried out, recolored with toxic dyes, and sold again. And then there was horseradish. Fresh horseradish root, when properly prepared, is pungent, sharp, nose-clearing. It's also expensive and labor-intensive to produce. So manufacturers cut corners. They mixed real horseradish with turnip shavings, leaves, and wood pulp, then colored the mixture with everything from chalk to lead compounds to achieve that appealing white color. It was all packaged in dark, opaque bottles. Why? To hide the filth inside. Customers had no way to know what they were buying. They had no way to know what they were feeding their families. They just had to trust, and trust was in short supply. Into this nightmare stepped Henry John Heinz. The Clear Glass Revolution. 1869. Henry was 25 years old when he founded his first company with L. Clarence Noble, a friend and local businessman. They called it Heinz and Noble. Their product? Grated horseradish, but with one crucial, revolutionary difference. They packaged it in clear glass bottles. The idea seems obvious in retrospect, but in 1869, it was radical, bordering on insane. Every other manufacturer in America used dark bottles specifically to hide their product's true appearance. Clear bottles meant you had to have a product worth showing off. It meant you couldn't take shortcuts. It meant you had to be clean. Heinz understood something profound. In a market drowning in deception, transparency itself could become a product. His horseradish was pure. Real horseradish root, properly graded, properly processed, with nothing added but a touch of vinegar. No fillers. No sawdust. No poison. And because it was in a clear bottle, customers could see that for themselves. The label was simple but elegant. Heinz and Noble, pure horseradish. The word pure was critical. It was a promise, a guarantee, a brand. And it worked. Customers who had been burned by other brands, who had fed their families God knows what, who were tired of being lied to, they flocked to Heinz. Here, finally, was a company that didn't just claim to be honest. It proved it with every bottle. Within a year, Heinz and Noble was producing and selling horseradish across western Pennsylvania. Within 2 years, they had expanded to pickles, sauerkraut, and vinegar, all in clear bottles, all emphasizing purity and quality. Henry worked 16-hour days. He was maniacal about cleanliness. His factories were spotless. Workers wore clean aprons. Floors were scrubbed daily. Produce was washed multiple times before processing. He personally inspected batches, rejecting anything that didn't meet his standards. His brother John once complained that Henry was too particular, that he was wasting time and money on details that customers would never notice. Henry's response was ice cold. They'll notice when they come back. By 1875, Heinz and Noble was generating significant revenue and expanding rapidly. Henry was investing heavily in new equipment, new facilities, new products. He was borrowing money to fuel growth, confident that the market would continue to expand, that demand would keep pace with supply. He was wrong. The crash. 1875. Financial panic. The Panic of 1873 had devastated the American economy, triggering a depression that would last 6 years. Banks collapsed. Businesses failed. Credit evaporated overnight. By 1875, even successful companies were struggling. Heinz and Noble, leveraged to the hilt and committed to expensive expansion, couldn't weather the storm. Creditors called in loans. Banks refused to extend credit. Accounts receivable, money owed to the company by customers, couldn't be collected because those customers were themselves going bankrupt. In December 1875, Heinz and Noble declared bankruptcy. Henry was devastated. At 29 years old, he was a failed businessman with a wife, children, and a mountain of debt. His name, so carefully cultivated as a symbol of trustworthiness, was now associated with failure. Creditors hounded him. Former partners blamed him. The humiliation was crushing. Most men would have quit, would have found a job working for someone else, accepted a steady paycheck, abandoned dreams of building something great. Henry Heinz was not most men. He spent Christmas 1875 in despair, but by New Year's Day 1876, he had made his decision. He would start again. He would rebuild. He would prove that the bankruptcy was a fluke, not a reflection of his vision or his abilities. There was just one problem. He was legally barred from running a business in his own name due to the bankruptcy. So he recruited his brother John and his cousin Frederick to be the official proprietors. The new company would be called F. and J. Heinz Company. But everyone knew who was really in charge. The ketchup revolution. Henry needed a product that would re-establish his reputation and generate quick revenue. Horseradish had worked before, but he needed something bigger. Something with mass appeal. Something American. He chose ketchup. Now, to understand what Heinz did with ketchup, you have to understand what ketchup was in the 1870s. Ketchup, or catsup, as it was often spelled, had ancient origins. The word likely derives from the Chinese kutsaiap, a fermented fish sauce. British traders brought the concept back to England, where it evolved into various mushroom, walnut, and oyster-based sauces. Tomato ketchup emerged in America in the early 1800s, but it was a problematic product. The ketchup available in stores in the 1870s was dark, thin, bitter, and inconsistent. It spoiled rapidly. To preserve it, manufacturers loaded it with coal tar dyes, sodium benzoate, and other chemicals, some of them toxic. The taste was harsh. The color was muddy. And because it was packaged in opaque bottles, customers never knew what they were getting until they got home and opened it. Home recipes were better but labor-intensive. Housewives would spend hours boiling tomatoes, straining out seeds and skins, adding vinegar and spices, then storing the result in jars where it would often spoil within weeks. Henry saw an opportunity to industrialize quality, to create a ketchup that was better than homemade, consistent, safe, and shelf-stable without dangerous preservatives. He started with the tomatoes themselves. While other manufacturers used whatever was cheapest, often green, unripe tomatoes or tomato waste from canning operations, Heinz insisted on ripe, red tomatoes. He contracted directly with farmers, specifying exact standards for size, color, and ripeness. Tomatoes that didn't meet specifications were rejected. Next came processing. Heinz developed a method to remove seeds and skins completely, creating a smooth, thick consistency unlike the chunky, watery ketchups on the market. He used distilled vinegar for preservation, clean, reliable, without off flavors. He added sugar for balance and sweetness. And he used a carefully calibrated blend of spices. But the real innovation was in preservation. By using a precise combination of high-quality tomatoes, distilled vinegar, and proper cooking temperatures, Heinz created a ketchup that was naturally shelf-stable. It didn't need sodium benzoate or coal tar or any of the other chemicals competitors relied on. And of course, it came in a clear bottle. When Heinz tomato ketchup launched in 1876, the centennial year of American independence, it was unlike anything on the market. Bright red, smooth, sweet and tangy, consistent from bottle to bottle, safe, pure. It was also more expensive than competitors' products. Henry didn't care. He was selling quality, not price. He was selling trust. The product took off slowly at first. Conservative customers were skeptical of paying more for ketchup. But once they tried it, they rarely went back to the cheap stuff. Heinz's ketchup tasted better. It looked better. It didn't make anyone sick. Word of mouth spread. Grocers reordered. By the 1880s, Heinz tomato ketchup was the company's best-selling product. Building the brand. Henry Heinz understood something that most industrialists of his era didn't: the power of branding. In the late 1800s, most products were generic. You didn't buy Acme flour or Smith sugar. You just bought flour or sugar, scooped from barrels, weighed out by the grocer, wrapped in brown paper. Brand names were rare. Product consistency was even rarer. Heinz changed that. Every bottle bore the Heinz name and a Keystone logo, representing Pennsylvania, the Keystone State. Every label was carefully designed, printed in multiple colors, expensive at the time, with decorative borders and clear, readable text listing ingredients. But Heinz's genius for marketing went far beyond labels. In 1886, he traveled to London to promote his products at the Fortnum and Mason department store. Rather than simply stocking shelves, Heinz created a display that stopped people in their tracks. He arranged his clear bottles in pyramids, with light streaming through them, creating a glowing, jewel-like effect. He offered free samples. He told the story of Pittsburgh, of purity, of American ingenuity. British customers, accustomed to their own food adulteration scandals, were charmed. Fortnum and Mason placed a large order. Heinz products began appearing in London shops, and soon across Europe. Back in America, Heinz was even more aggressive. He bought billboard space on buildings, bridges, and along railroad lines. He painted huge Heinz 57 varieties signs on the sides of barns visible from train windows. He handed out promotional items, pickle pins, miniature bottles, recipe booklets, turning customers into walking advertisements. But his most famous marketing coup came in 1892, during a train ride through New York City. 57 varieties. The number that meant nothing and everything. Henry Heinz was riding an elevated train through Manhattan when he noticed an advertisement for a shoe company boasting 21 styles of shoes. Something about that number stuck in his mind. It was specific. It suggested abundance. It was memorable. When he returned to Pittsburgh, he gathered his team. "How many products do we currently manufacture?" he asked. His managers tallied it up. "More than 60, sir." Heinz smiled. "We're going to advertise 57 varieties." His team was confused. Why 57? Why not 60? Or a nice round number like 50 or 100? Heinz never gave a satisfactory explanation. Years later, he admitted the number was arbitrary. He just liked how it sounded. 5 and 7 were his lucky numbers. 57 had a ring to it. It sounded abundant without being unbelievable. It was, in essence, a complete fabrication. But it was a brilliant fabrication. Within months, Heinz 57 varieties appeared on every label, every advertisement, every promotional material. In 1896, Heinz erected a 40-foot-tall electric sign in New York City, one of the first illuminated advertisements in Manhattan. It showed a giant pickle with 57 varieties in glowing bulbs. At night, it could be seen from miles away. The slogan became one of the most recognizable in American history. People didn't care that it was meaningless. It represented abundance, variety, quality. It represented Heinz. The lie became truth. The truth became legend. And the legend sold millions of bottles. The factory as theater. While competitors hid their factories behind brick walls and locked gates, Henry Heinz threw his doors wide open. In the 1890s, he rebuilt his main facility in Pittsburgh into a showpiece of industrial design. The building featured massive windows that flooded the interior with natural light. Walls were tiled in white, easy to clean and inspect. Floors were concrete, not dirt or wood, and were scrubbed daily. But more importantly, Heinz turned his factory into a tourist attraction. He established a formal tour program, inviting customers, journalists, civic leaders, and curious visitors to walk through his facilities and see exactly how Heinz products were made. Guides led groups through every stage of production, from raw materials arriving by rail to finished products being boxed for shipment. Visitors saw workers in crisp white uniforms and caps. They saw gleaming copper kettles and modern machinery. They saw produce being washed multiple times, inspected, processed under strict sanitation protocols. They saw the absence of rats, filth, and chaos that characterized most American factories. It was industrial theater, carefully choreographed to communicate one message: Heinz was clean. Heinz was modern. Heinz could be trusted. Heinz even built amenities for his workers that were virtually unheard of at the time. The factory included a roof garden where workers could take lunch breaks surrounded by flowers and fresh air. There was a gymnasium, an auditorium for concerts and lectures, a swimming pool, a free medical clinic, a library. Critics called it paternalistic, a way to control workers and discourage union organizing. Supporters called it progressive, evidence that capitalism could be humane. The truth was probably both. Heinz genuinely believed in treating workers well, but he also knew that happy workers were productive workers, and that worker welfare was good publicity. Journalists who toured the facility wrote glowing articles. Civic leaders praised Heinz as a model employer. Customers felt good buying Heinz products, knowing they came from a clean factory with treated workers well. It was brilliant marketing disguised as social conscience. 1906. The Jungle and the Pure Food Act. Then came 1906, the year that would transform American food safety and cement Heinz's dominance. Upton Sinclair's novel The Jungle exploded into American consciousness like a bomb. Intended as an exposé of working conditions in Chicago's meatpacking plants, it instead shocked readers with its graphic descriptions of what went into American food. Rats running over meat. Workers falling into rendering tanks and being ground up into lard. Spoiled meat being treated with chemicals to hide the smell, then sold to unsuspecting families. Tuberculosis-infected beef. Sausages containing rat feces. The public was horrified. President Theodore Roosevelt, after reading the book and commissioning his own investigation, was furious. Congress moved quickly to pass reform legislation. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 required food manufacturers to meet minimum sanitation standards, prohibited certain dangerous preservatives and additives, and mandated accurate labeling. For the first time, the federal government would inspect food facilities and could shut down operations that didn't meet standards. Most food companies panicked. The new regulations would require expensive facility upgrades. Recipes would need to change. Business practices would need to be overhauled. Many smaller companies simply couldn't afford to comply. But when the inspectors came to Pittsburgh to inspect Heinz facilities, they found something remarkable. Heinz was already in compliance. In fact, Heinz's standards exceeded the new federal requirements. Henry Heinz had been operating clean factories for decades. The Pure Food Act wasn't a threat, it was a gift. It forced his competitors to either match his standards or go out of business. Heinz publicly celebrated the new law. He testified before Congress in favor of even stricter regulations. He opened his factories to government inspectors and encouraged them to be thorough. He gave interviews praising Roosevelt and the reformers. It was, of course, brilliant positioning. While competitors scrambled and complained, Heinz looked like the responsible corporate citizen who had been doing the right thing all along. Many smaller competitors couldn't afford the upgrades and went bankrupt. Others were bought out, often by Heinz. The company's market share soared. The Pure Food Act of 1906 didn't just clean up American food. It consolidated the industry, favoring large, well-capitalized companies that could afford to meet the new standards. Heinz was perfectly positioned to benefit. The iron fist in the velvet glove. But let's not romanticize Henry Heinz. Behind the smiling public face, the pious church-going persona, the progressive employer reputation, there was a ruthless businessman who played hardball. Heinz controlled every aspect of his supply chain with an iron grip. He contracted directly with farmers, but the contracts favored Heinz heavily. Farmers who didn't meet quality standards, even through no fault of their own, could have entire harvests rejected. Heinz paid fairly, but he expected perfection. In distribution, Heinz was equally aggressive. He wanted prime shelf space in every grocery store. To get it, he offered grocers better margins than competitors. But those margins came with strings attached: prominent display, loyalty agreements, exclusivity clauses. Grocers who didn't cooperate found their orders delayed or their terms changed. Competitors accused Heinz of predatory pricing, selling below cost in certain markets to drive rivals out of business, then raising prices once the competition was eliminated. Heinz never admitted to this, but the pattern repeated too often to be coincidence. Labor relations were more complex. Yes, Heinz provided amenities and paid better than most factories. But he also opposed unions, fired workers who tried to organize, and cultivated a culture of total loyalty to the company. Workers who spoke out about problems or questioned company policies often found themselves unemployed. Heinz's obsession with cleanliness and perfection sometimes veered into the pathological. He would surprise inspect facilities, running his finger along windowsills to check for dust, examining workers' hands for cleanliness, tasting products straight from production lines. Workers lived in fear of his inspections. One story, possibly apocryphal but widely repeated, claimed that Heinz once fired a factory manager on the spot for having dirty fingernails, despite the man's years of loyal service and excellent production numbers. "Our products go into people's mouths," Heinz reportedly said. "Everything must be immaculate." He demanded the same perfection in his personal life. His home was spotless. His clothing was always crisp and pressed. His schedule was regimented down to the minute. He attended church every Sunday, read the Bible daily, and expected his family and employees to maintain the same standards of moral rectitude. Was he a hypocrite? Perhaps. He preached Christian charity while crushing competitors. He praised worker welfare while opposing unions. He sold purity and transparency while manipulating markets and public opinion. Or perhaps he was simply a man of his era, convinced that his success was evidence of moral superiority, that his methods were justified by his results, that the world needed men of vision and iron will to drag it forward, whether it wanted to go or not. The empire at its peak. By 1910, the H.J. Heinz Company, officially renamed after Henry bought out his partners, was an industrial colossus. The main facility in Pittsburgh sprawled across multiple city blocks. The company owned farms across Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan. It operated facilities in New York, New Jersey, and Illinois. It had distribution centers across the United States and warehouses in London, Hamburg, and Sydney. The product line had expanded far beyond the original 57 varieties to include hundreds of items. Multiple varieties of pickles, relishes, condiments, soups, beans, pasta, baby food, olive oil, vinegar, mustard, and dozens of specialty items. Annual sales exceeded $5 million, roughly $150 million in today's dollars, but far more impressive given the smaller economy and population of 1910 America. Heinz employed over 6,000 workers directly and contracted with thousands of farmers. The Heinz pickle pin, a promotional item given away at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, had become a collector's item, with millions distributed worldwide. The Heinz name was recognized from New York to San Francisco, from London to Melbourne. Henry himself had become a captain of industry, hobnobbing with Rockefeller, Carnegie, and other titans. He sat on boards, advised politicians, donated to churches and charities. He was, by any measure, one of the most successful businessmen in America. And yet, he never stopped working. Well into his 60s and 70s, he maintained a brutal schedule, personally overseeing operations, inspecting facilities, testing products, plotting expansions. Associates marveled at his stamina. They also noted that he seemed incapable of relaxing, of ever being satisfied. There was always another factory to build, another market to enter, another competitor to outmaneuver. Perhaps, some speculated, he was still running from the ghost of that 1875 bankruptcy, still trying to prove something to himself, to his critics, to the world. Or perhaps he simply loved the game. The final years. 1919. Henry John Heinz died on May 14, 1919, at his home in Pittsburgh. He was 75 years old. He had outlived most of his contemporaries. Carnegie had died a few months earlier. Rockefeller was still alive but retired. The world they had built, the world of industrial titans and robber barons, of rapid expansion and limited regulation, of individual will shaping national destiny, was already fading. World War I had ended 6 months before Heinz's death. America was exhausted, traumatized, beginning to question the costs of unbridled capitalism. Labor unions were growing stronger. Progressive reformers were gaining power. Prohibition was about to be enacted, fundamentally altering American food and drink culture. Heinz had seen it all. The Civil War, the Industrial Revolution, the Spanish-American War, the Pure Food Act, World War I. He had seen America transform from an agricultural society to an industrial powerhouse, from a collection of regions to a unified nation, from isolation to global involvement. And he had helped feed that transformation, one bottle at a time. His funeral was a major event in Pittsburgh. Thousands attended. Factories closed for the day. Politicians delivered eulogies. Newspapers published lengthy obituaries celebrating his life and accomplishments. But perhaps the most telling tribute was this. In homes across America and around the world, on kitchen tables and in pantries, there sat bottles bearing his name. Ketchup, pickles, relish, vinegar, beans. People who had never met Henry Heinz, who knew nothing of his childhood or his bankruptcy or his ruthless business tactics, trusted those bottles. Trusted the name. Trusted the brand. That was his real achievement. Not the money. Not the factories. Not even the products themselves. The trust. Legacy and epilogue. The H.J. Heinz Company continued to grow after its founder's death. Henry's son, Howard Heinz, took over and proved to be a capable if less visionary leader. The company weathered the Great Depression, adapted to World War II rationing, expanded globally during the post-war boom. By the 1960s, Heinz was a multinational corporation with operations on 6 continents. The product line had expanded to include frozen foods, baby food, pet food, and international brands adapted to local tastes. In 2013, Heinz was acquired by Berkshire Hathaway and 3G Capital for $23 billion. In 2015, it merged with Kraft Foods to form the Kraft Heinz Company, one of the largest food companies in the world. Today, you can find Heinz products in virtually every country on Earth. The Keystone logo is recognized by billions. Heinz tomato ketchup remains one of the best-selling condiments worldwide, with the distinctive glass bottle shape legally protected as a trademark. But the food industry Henry Heinz knew is gone. Industrial food production has become so massive, so complex, so globalized that no one person could possibly oversee it the way Henry did. Food safety is regulated by multiple government agencies with thousands of inspectors. Supply chains span continents. Modern ketchup is produced in facilities that make Henry's spotless factories look primitive by comparison. And yet, many of the problems Henry identified remain. Food scandals still erupt regularly: contaminated meat, mislabeled fish, pesticide residues, allergen fraud. Trust in food companies wavers. Consumers demand transparency, organic options, local sourcing, clean labels. In response, companies try to project the same values Heinz championed: purity, quality, trustworthiness. They use clear packaging to show the product. They tout simple ingredients and nothing artificial. They invite customers to tour facilities, virtually, if not physically. They've learned the lesson Henry Heinz taught. In a world of suspicion and uncertainty, trust is the most valuable product you can sell. The paradox of Heinz. So what should we make of Henry John Heinz? Was he a visionary who genuinely cared about food safety and public health? Or an opportunist who exploited fear and uncertainty to build a monopoly? Was he a progressive employer who treated workers with dignity? Or a paternalistic autocrat who used benefits to discourage collective bargaining? Was he an honest businessman who simply made superior products? Or a ruthless competitor who crushed rivals through superior capital and calculated ruthlessness? The answer, of course, is yes to all of it. Henry Heinz was a bundle of contradictions: deeply religious yet commercially aggressive, obsessed with purity yet willing to manipulate and deceive when it served business purposes, progressive in some ways and reactionary in others. But perhaps that's what it took to transform an industry. Pure idealists rarely build empires. Pure cynics rarely build brands that last. Heinz succeeded because he understood that you could do well by doing good, that quality could be profitable, that trust could be monetized, that ethical positioning could be commercially advantageous. He proved that in the emerging consumer economy, the company that could credibly claim to care about customers' welfare would win, whether or not that claim was entirely sincere. That insight remains relevant today. In our age of corporate social responsibility, mission-driven brands, and conscious capitalism, we're still grappling with the same question Heinz faced. Can a company genuinely do good while pursuing profit? Or is every gesture of corporate ethics ultimately just sophisticated marketing? Heinz's answer was pragmatic. It doesn't matter, as long as customers benefit. If presenting yourself as ethical forces you to actually be more ethical, if selling trust requires you to actually be trustworthy, then the outcome is the same whether the motivation is pure or not. The ends, in other words, can justify the means, as long as the ends are good ketchup in clean bottles that don't poison anyone. It's a very American philosophy: practical, optimistic, comfortable with contradiction, focused on results over ideology. And it built an empire that lasted more than a century. The bottle on your table. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is sitting down to dinner. On their table is a bottle of Heinz ketchup. They squeeze some onto their plate without thinking about it, without wondering where it came from or who made it or what's in it. They trust it implicitly. That trust was manufactured, carefully, deliberately, over decades, by a man who understood that in a world of lies, the truth could be the ultimate competitive advantage. That bottle contains more than ketchup. It contains the ghost of Henry John Heinz, his ambition, his perfectionism, his marketing genius, his contradictions. It contains a story about how America industrialized, how food became safe or safer, how brands became more important than products, how trust became something you could package and sell. It contains a lesson about the power of transparency, and about how even transparency can be a kind of performance, a carefully constructed illusion of honesty that may or may not reflect the full reality behind it. Open that bottle. Pour some ketchup. Taste it. You're tasting more than tomatoes and vinegar and spices. You're tasting the American dream, packaged, processed, branded, and sold by a man who knew that dreams, like ketchup, sell better in clear glass bottles. You're tasting the legacy of John Heinz, the man who cleaned up a dirty industry, built an empire on purity, and proved that in America you can sell anything, even trust itself.